Welcome to Floyd Street's Finest. He is Holy Cross head coach Mark Lieberman. I am Jack Grossman. Thanks for tuning in to Floyd Street's Finest, part of the Field of 68 podcast network. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. I remembered again. It's what, three in a row now? Pretty
Three in
good.
a row. That's yes. Your batting
I
percentage
might,
is unbelievable.
it's going up like Louisville's defensive rebounding percentage. But you can like, subscribe, follow on YouTube, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you are finding this. I'm at Jack Grossman 97 on Twitter. He is at Coach Lieberman. Coach, how's the season been going? I heard
I
my
would say
dad
this.
tried to make it to a
Yeah, I
game
would
on
say this
Saturday.
for everybody listening. Always check, when you check schedules, make sure it's the high school team, not the college team, if the names are similar. So, listen, you can always text me and find out, because especially in high school, games get moved, things get changed, but just make sure that you're clicking on the high school schedule and not a college one. And you can elaborate on that story, Jack.
For full disclosure, love my dad. He's great,
He's
but
great. He's great. Ken's a great guy.
But so I was talking to him Saturday morning, and he goes, "I'm gonna go catch the Holy Cross game." I was like, "Great, yeah, love it, Coach. I really appreciate that." And I get a text from him at about. He said the game was gonna start at 2. He texted me about like 1:50, 1:55 ish. He goes, "Jack, I think there's an issue." And I go, "What's up?" He goes, "Well, I'm at the gym." I'm like, "Yeah." And there's no one in the parking lot. I'm like, what do you mean? And turns out Ken Grossman had looked up the Holy Cross College schedule, not the Holy Cross High School schedule. So it was a valiant effort. He'll get
It
out to another
was.
game.
Listen, yeah,
But
it was. I listen. I will make sure I get the full schedule to him so he won't be in that situation again. Nothing like showing up and there's crickets. Kind of like Calipari when he said, "Talk to the team and there is no team. Show up to a game, there is no game." So you got this same type of deal there, Jack.
oh god, did you hear Calipari on it was Tuesday night after the Jimmy V Classic with Scott Van Pelt?
I did not. Please share
It
that with
was
me.
a very weird interview where Cal went full Cal, but at the end of it, he's like, "Can I go talk to my team now?" And he said it like 4 or 5 times, and SVP's like, "Yeah, well, I'm not gonna hold you up. You can leave whatever you want." It was kind of bizarre, but that was a wild game. Arkansas and Michigan, very
Yeah.
back and forth. But
Yes, it was.
Louisville, though, is what we're talking about here. Survived UTEP on Wednesday night. We'll touch on that quickly, but I want to get your thoughts on Duke. We want to talk Louisville, Kentucky, Battle of the Bluegrass. But first, Louisville survives UTEP. And have you ever seen two teams, Louisville and Kentucky, have more of a trap game than Louisville hosts Duke? Kentucky goes across the country to play Gonzaga in Seattle, and they have the Battle of the Bluegrass, UofL, UK, Rupp Arena on Saturday. And in between that, we saw a lot of times, Calipari especially do this. Chris Mack would do this at Louisville. Patino did this occasionally as well. You would have that full week to prepare for the rivalry game. Instead, both coaches threw in a midweek game against a UTEP team that's top 150 in Ken Palm and very well could win their conference and make the NCAA tournament, and a Colgate team that, while they're 2-9 this year, is traditionally a really good low major
Mhm.
team. What
Yeah.
the heck were these two coaches thinking, scheduling these games in
Yeah,
between
listen,
those two?
it's maybe a little bit of a wonky kind of fallacy right there with the scheduling. Also, when I was at Louisville, it was almost like there was so much on that Kentucky week that you almost over prepare. And I don't know if that's the mindset, but certainly, look, I'm a Star Wars fan. I like to talk movies. As Admiral Akbar said, this was a trap. And I'm sure people took advantage of that one. And I told people, look, these are games, no matter what. When you come off playing a Duke and you have Kentucky and you sandwich in a UTEP, and the same thing with Colgate, you don't think the players are already, hey, they're gearing up and they're focused. And they just want to get through these type of games. Yeah, it's kind of a peculiar kind of scheduling flaw right there, and probably something to look at as they move forward. But yeah, definitely something that was a little strange as far as the scheduling goes.
Yeah, all in all, no harm, no foul. Long term for both teams, they were able to survive in advance. They
Yes.
avoided the traps, but it was a little bit wonkier there for both of them than they would have cared to admit. There, Louisville especially only surviving UTEP by 3, but we saw a couple things there that I want to hit on. A greater rebounding trend that I want to talk about, but James Scott and Terrence Edwards, both in these
Mm-hmm.
Duke and UTEP games, I thought have kind of started to turn a corner a little bit. Scott just first and foremost being able to stay on the floor. I know he had three fouls Wednesday night, four fouls against Duke, but it takes 29 minutes and 26 minutes to get those 3, 4 fouls instead of 8, 10, 11 minutes. That's a very big difference. You can be out on the floor and be effective and have a big impact on the game if it takes that long to get those 3, 4 fouls versus, having 2 fouls by the first media timeout and being auto benched for the rest of the game. And we've seen it. He was effective at times against Duke. He had a double against UTEP.
Yeah.
When he's on the floor, he can be really effective and really change the complexion of what everything Louisville does.
I don't think Coach Kelsey pulls guys, has a quick hook. He
He does
likes his
not.
rotation.
Yeah.
But when he had the depth before the injuries, and now you have a James Scott who can play through some mistakes, can play through some of those things that he's doing, because look, he's effective. He's the closest thing they have to a rim protector. He's got length. He's a excellent passer. He's a rebounder. He's got a great motor. So for him, he's only going to get better. What he's developing right now is only going to help him in the long run. And how he played against Duke and what he needs to do against Kentucky is vital for this team to be successful.
Yeah, and I'll say this to your point, Pat Kelsey. I the last time I checked it, which was before the UTEP game, but he, how do I phrase this correctly? In 2 foul participation in the first half, Louisville's in the top 40 in the country and playing guys the most often with 2 fouls. So Pat Kelsey's been willing to do that. He doesn't really have a choice some of the time
Mm-hmm.
with all the injuries that UofL has had, but sometimes, especially early in the season, you just didn't really have a choice. You get 2 fouls that quickly, you're not going to have as much trust that that guy can avoid picking up a third foul. That goes case by case basis, but James Scott getting more comfortable and being more active and being able to avoid that quick early foul trouble gives him a better chance to stay on the floor longer.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. We talk about in coaching avoidable fouls and staying out of the ones, especially 60 feet from the basket,
Yeah.
or the ones that you can avoid, and then playing through that. Understand that good defensive players don't foul, and that's something that Coach Kelsey stresses. And making sure hands are shown to officials. You're trying to catch moves, even the physicality of being able to attack guys early and being first, whether it's stunting and whatnot, or defensively walling up, things that I know that staff works on. So the avoidable fouls, which you just mentioned, Jack, is a key to that.
For sure. And you said it when he's on the court. He's Louisville's best shot blocker. He's an absolute, lob threat from the dunker
Mm-hmm.
spot. He's good in that dribble handoff and zoom actions like we've talked about. And it just changes to me again, the whole complexion of what you can do defensively and really on both ends of the floor in terms of now you can really be a lot more aggressive on the ball, trying to heat offenses up because you have a little bit of a protector on the back end. If you get beat, there's not as much fear from that side of things. You have a guy that can go out and use his size, length, athleticism to where you're not having to focus 100,000% anyways on getting rebounding like Louisville is kind of forced to do. And they've done a much better job of. We'll get to that in a minute. But I think that just it raises the ceiling so much. If James Scott can stay out of foul trouble, and if Connie Roots can build on really, especially what we saw in the Duke game, but also the couple flashes we saw against UTEP as well.
Yeah, I think, not to get ahead of ourselves, Kentucky understands that too, whether it's Carr or Williams.
Oh
They're going
yeah,
to play through the post and try and get him, because he's not going to front. He's going to, try and wall up and get behind. But and that's the problem there, as far as, okay, they're going to look to attack him certainly on that end of the floor. And that's, that goes into scouting. Everybody, we've talked about that before. It's not just about taking away what they like to do. It's how do you attack them defensively. And if you think Kentucky's not going to try and go inside and play inside out, which they've done, it is absolutely a mindset of what Kentucky's trying to do on Saturday.
absolutely. And you said it right there. I mean, I remember watching the Duke game, especially. We saw it ad nauseum to where they basically ran Amari Williams as the point center a lot of
Mm-hmm.
possessions. And when they made the comeback late in the game, it was playing through Andrew Carr. And
Mm-hmm.
they've done such a good job of using Andrew Carr on the elbow, using him as a screener to free himself up, and getting him into actions that way as well, to where I look at Louisville's really, I mean, they missed Case and Pryor in a lot of areas, but this is a game where they're really going to miss him with how much I think Kentucky. First of all, I think Kentucky's more effective when they run stuff through Andrew Carr than Amari Williams, but I think you're going to see him try to do both, especially to try to get Scott into early foul trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's going to be a big key of because that would be the natural matchup of Case and Pryor or Traore if he was healthy as well, trying to heat up the ball, pressure Carr, and make him make mistakes as a guy that's a capable ball handler, but isn't going to be a Jackson Robinson, Lamont Butler, pure point guard type of role there. How Louisville handles that is going to be an absolutely massive key on Saturday.
Yes, and look, this is where Lamont Butler earns his NIL because his job is to neutralize Chucky. It's almost like you're looking at two really top end defensive players. And I think both teams are going to try and take them out of the mix where they're not as being as much of an X factor on the defensive end, where you're seeing guys bring up the basketball, where you're seeing them get into actions where you're just not letting those guys disrupt what they're trying to do. If it's playing through the bigs, what you just mentioned, where elbow touches, pinching the post, getting into those actions where you're trying to avoid where those two could be disruptive, that's going to be a huge part of this game as well.
Yeah, and on the other end, that's where I think Terrence Edwards, the way he's played the last couple of days, really attacking, really, being more aggressive, looking more confident as well.
That's the
But
biggest thing I
yeah,
think is the confidence. You look at him; he's been so hesitant, Jack, and some of the opportunities. Now he's catching and shooting. He's being more aggressive. I wouldn't say he's hunting for shots, but it's a good way of him looking and searching and so on, where he's a little more tentative. And we talked about that. It's the sample size we had earlier. It's a long season. A guy like him he can play, and people were like, when is he going to emerge? And we've seen that now. Obviously, it's going to be Saturday, where it's a big game for Terrence Edwards bringing the ball up, Hadley, whatever, getting into actions through those guys, and even look against Duke, they ran some good stuff. You had some great hammer actions. You had some back screens and slips. I think those opportunities are stuff they're going to look for. Which again, I think they did a really good job on against Duke on the offensive end.
yeah. Well, I'll go and ask you about that then. What did you see from Duke? I mean, obviously early on they were shooting the lights out from three, 8 of the first 11. Cooled down from behind the arc, but I still thought they got a lot of good looks, even as Duke's defense tightened up in the second half as well. What did you see from Louisville offensively, and what from that can be replicated on Saturday and moving forward?
This was the first time maybe since the opener I saw attention getting cuts, and they were cutting with purpose and cutting to score. And cutting doesn't mean just to the basket. It means you're replacing yourself, you're screening, you're recognizing. They were reading the defense. The one play where Rain Smith slips the action, he's setting a back screen and he's able to slip. I think Waterman hits him for the layup. I mean, those type of things. Everything was reads, and they were cutting with purpose. And I think this was even look against Duke. Duke is really can smother you because of their length and their athleticism. But I think they were getting good looks, and they could make shots and cut the way they were. I think this is going to be a good game for them offensively because I think they're going to replicate that and show a lot of film against Duke and show how they were getting those open looks. Yeah, everybody's they're making shots, but they were replacing themselves. They were cutting hard. They're running the floor. Those are the opportunities they're going to get if they consistently do that. Now they're getting into a rhythm when you lose Pryor, you lose Traore, you lose those guys. All right, now they practice now for a couple of weeks now, understanding each other better because immediately, example, you get into that, you can replace a guy and then all of a sudden the guy gets hurt and you don't have a rhythm, you don't have the synergy. Now they have that. They got back to practice. They understand that. I think in the next couple of days, you're going to see them really focus on those type of things offensively. And I think we'll see that Saturday.
Yeah, I would say I think you've seen three guys. Not that Louisville's quote unquote filled Pryor's role by any means, but I think you've seen three guys kind of step up, whether it be Edwards being more aggressive offensively, like we talked about, Hadley really, being a monster on the glass the last couple weeks or so. He had 12 and 13 against UTEP on Wednesday night, and they're kind of going to that short post or short corner post up action with him a
Mm-hmm.
lot, which has done a good job of when he's been left one on one with smaller players, he's been able to attack that. When doubles have come, they've been able to kick that out and be able to get some open looks off of it. Connie Rude
And
essentially said, yeah.
part of that, Jack, excuse me, is that just they get it to the second or third side when they get that short corner post or that mid post area. It's not just coming down and just ball watching and standing. They get great actions off of that. They're cutting really hard. So they're making the defenders move. They're creating switches. They're getting to where they're out of position where they're not in position to dig or maybe they're overhelping. They did that really well against Duke. So it's not just coming down. It's really getting to the second or third side to create those opportunities for a Terrence Edwards, for the other guys as well.
Yeah, and I'd say when Louisville's offense has been at their best, that's what they've been doing. They've reversed the ball a bunch. They've really moved it, got to that second and third side, and that's something they're going to absolutely have to do against
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky as well. But I think those three guys have kind of, again, not fully replaced Pryor, but you've seen now to where they're getting a little bit of a rhythm, as you said, to where it doesn't look nearly as awkward as it did, especially in that Ole Miss game.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's the thing. That's what you're going to, teams don't stay the same. They get better, they get worse, and then injuries are a part of it. So then you practice. You're not going to wallow on self pity and say, okay, well, we don't have this guy. You're going to figure out, hey, how can we get better on this stuff? And I think they really did that. You saw that in the Duke game. We're not going to over talk about UTEP because it's a little sandwich in there. But I think what they're showing is that, okay, we understand how to play without that guy, and James Scott being more of a facilitator. And he could do that. Now he's getting more reps, and he understands that. He's getting practice reps. That's always going to help.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add is, we criticized it early in the season when it was a big issue. You gotta give them their props when it's been better, even though they've lost three of the four games, a lot of it, tough competition, all that stuff. But Louisville's rebounding, something that I've harped on for a while now, has been really, really good the last four games. Ironically, since Pryor, who's the quote unquote best rebounder on the team, got hurt, I think we've seen kind of that sense of urgency of, needing to gain rebound, needing to be more aggressive on that end of the floor. Just looking both at just the raw rebounding stats, they were plus 21 against Oklahoma, plus
Yes.
7
Mm-hmm.
against Ole Miss, only -1 against the tallest team in the country in Duke, and they were plus 11 against UTEP. And their big issue had been defensive rebounding in particular. They've been a good offensive rebounding team all year, but during that 4-game stretch, their offensive rebounding percentage for their opponents have been under 25% for 5 straight games now. The Louisville's gone from 200th in the country defensive rebounding percentage to now 130th. Those are all really encouraging good trends over a 4 or 5 game sample size where you can, ever since that West Virginia game, where you can say, okay, as you said, teams don't stay the same. They either get worse or get better. In this area, you're seeing them get better, especially impressively, I might add, against higher major competition, against competition where you would say on paper they would struggle more than what you would see earlier in the year.
Well, we had talked about that, and having and knowing what Coach Kelsey's doing in practice. It's not something they just teach; they emphasize it. And a big thing for them is you don't have to get the rebound, but your man can't, and that means just being physical and taking a guy that's obsessed with rebounding, hitting him, and making sure. You talk about gang rebounding. You don't have to get it, but your man can't. So on the defensive end, I think they've done a much better job. On the offensive end, your offense helps your defense as well. When you know where the shots are coming from and you're running good offense, then you can anticipate where those shots and get a chance to get those offensive rebounds because the defense is discombobulated as well. So I think on both ends, and I knew because we had talked about that earlier, I think that was something that was going to improve because of it's something they emphasize, something they teach. Coach Kelsey's a very good teacher, so I knew that was something they were going to get better at. I think they're going to be physical on the boards on Saturday as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that's going to be a big key too, because both teams, especially you mentioned when you take a lot of threes, take a lot of long shots, it's going to cause longer rebounds. Your initial, instinct is to go in where the ball may go out. It's
Oh,
not
you
once
remember
it's
that? I
yeah.
like that. All right, Jack.
Hey, I pick it up. You say it, say it. I remember, but both Louisville and Kentucky, I don't think it's a coincidence that two teams that shoot a lot of threes are both top 30, 35 in the country at offensive rebounding percentage. It's not just the aggressiveness and the willingness to crash the offensive glass. It's the fact that the way they shoot and miss shots, it can lead to a lot more natural offensive rebounding.
Right. And look, no matter what you do in a scout or prepare to play a Kentucky or a Louisville, is the fact that no matter what, your instincts sometimes take over. And those guys, especially again, I hark back to the offensive movement and getting those shots and those guys anticipating where those rebounds are going to come from. And it's hard to scout that because no matter what, as much as you emphasize it, when those long shots come, you're naturally those guys have much more space. So when you're taking mid-range shots or shots around the rim, there's not as much space. And when you have room and you have 15 to 20 feet to kind of gravitate and get around guys and so on, that's a big difference. So when you shoot threes, it allows you because you're not in a cramped area. It's not mucked up. You have room. And when you anticipate it and you're not going to be hit because it's a longer stretch to close out and recover and hit a guy, then you have room. And when you teach that and offensively, you say, we want second shots. The worst thing you can give up is a second shot. There's only one thing worse, a third shot. So that's what you have this team doing, and they understand that.
One thing you mentioned earlier that I really want to hit on, you said Lamont Butler is going to need to get his NIL or earn his NIL on Saturday. He's a guy that's been out the past week and a half or so for Kentucky. It sounds like, from what I've heard, he's going to play. I'm by no means reporting that by any means, just kind of reading the tea leaves there, that it sounds like he's going to play on Saturday, which I think can totally change the complexion of the entire game if he's able to play and be effective and play well for Kentucky, because On both ends of the floor, really. His biggest, he's a lot like Chucky Hepburn, to where he's one of the best on-ball defenders in the country. He absolutely pesters the heck out of you on that end of the floor, but it also gives Kentucky another guy in the backcourt. Because they're going to be missing Kirk Creesa as well, who had
Yes.
the injury against Gonzaga. Um, that gives them an extra ball handler, to where we talked about playing through Andrew Carr and the bigs, but now they can play through um, Lamont Butler, play through Jackson Robinson, and just have a lot more facilitators on the floor, to where you can't just say if Butler isn't playing, Chucky, go guard Jackson Robinson and take him out of the game and
Hmm.
eliminate, which Kentucky has so many weapons anyways, but eliminate really the one dude on the perimeter that would be able to facilitate. Lamont Butler brings another guy that can do that, which complicates things for Louisville on the defensive end if he's able to be effective.
Oh, absolutely. And look, he hasn't played. I think if it was a situation keeping him out for another game and getting him as healthy as possible, I think that's kind of the mindset of the Kentucky brass. But look, if he does play, and I think he's going to play, is that look, he affects the game, and he affects the game without dominating the basketball. And you have a guy on the floor, and that's what Chucky's been asked to do so much sometimes against Duke, and we talked about the length and the activity. Sometimes he was over penetrating because he's doing a lot more than he's been asked to do previously. And now you're adding the factor of Lamont Butler guarding him and pressuring him and making the pickup points, which Lamont Butler was so good at San Diego State. I mean, that ball goes in. He is finding his guy. His pickup point is always as good as anybody in college basketball. And what he'll do, that's going to disrupt some things that Louisville likes to do, even if it's not always going to be Chucky bringing up the ball. When you take him out and making him have to look, if he's got to work even harder to get open, again, the wear and tear on that, it's a factor. You wear guys down, and we've this is what we've seen happen in college basketball. When you have a guy like Lamont Butler, who's just so him and Chucky Hepburn are very similar in that regard. You take him out, I just think that's going to be, if he plays, it's another thing that Louisville's going to have to understand. Okay, we still got to cut hard and move and get into our stuff maybe through other avenues.
Yeah, and I'd say it is a two-way street, though. Chucky Hepburn can do a lot of that same stuff to Lamont Butler, Jackson Robinson. I think the biggest difference is even without Kirk Creesa, Kentucky just can come at waves with you a lot more than Louisville can. And that's what we kind of saw in the Duke
Yeah.
game, to where Louisville came out and we talked about it. Like we expected Louisville's energy and intensity to be really, really good after that Ole Miss game, and it was on both ends of the floor. But you saw them fatigue as the game went on, even late in the first half, to where I thought, I talked about this when I just did my quick recap after the game. Louisville needed to build up enough of a lead when they were hitting shots early to be able to sustain the eventual not crash, is not the right word, but when fatigue would kick in a little bit more and you weren't able to play with that same energy for 40 minutes. How can Louisville take what they learned from that Duke game, and if there's anything they could do to try to sustain, because they need to play with that level of energy, effort, and intensity for 40 minutes to beat Kentucky? Can they do that? And how are they able to do that compared to what we saw against Duke?
Well, I think it's as good as Kentucky is offensively. A lot of their stuff isn't as Duke, with a lot of straight line drives, the athleticism that gets to the rims, and the driving kicks. Kentucky's going to get a lot more movement. What that will allow is a Chucky Hepburn to play a little bit more active off the ball. We saw that in the Bahamas when teams are doing that. He was able to get in passing lanes. He would pick up and that was where he was so disruptive. And against Duke, because of their speed and athleticism, and they're just coming downhill so much, that really kind of eliminates him in that regard. So now you have a situation against Kentucky where he could probably be a little more active off the ball and anticipate, because of what Kentucky runs. It's just a different type of offensive mindset. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing for him. And I think that's the biggest thing for what Louisville has to do collectively, Jack, defensively. I think that's the biggest thing, is they have to understand, as far as not overhelping, and understand what all the misdirection that Kentucky likes to run and what they like to do in their spacing. It's Louisville-esque from that standpoint, so they can practice against it. I just think these guys have to have a mindset, first of all, of limiting paint touches with Kentucky and making sure we're not overhelping. We understand our assignments, the heads on the swivel. I think they did a decent job against Duke. Duke's just loaded with talent, and I think Kentucky is the same, but I think Kentucky is a little more methodical than a Duke team, and I think that kind of plays into what Louisville can do defensively, and not have to be where the athleticism just overrides what they can do as a team concept.
Yeah, I would say like Duke almost felt like when you play like traditionally a Michigan or Ohio State or an Alabama in football, where you can come out, you can have big plays early, you can get out to a big start, but then they can just keep running the ball, pounding the ball, just keep that offensive line just starts to
That's
lean on
it.
you throughout
Yeah.
the game. And
Hmm.
and Duke with all the athletes, with all the athleticism, with how deep their benches, it just felt like the basketball equivalent
Yeah.
of we're just gonna lean on you and we're gonna wear you down. Kentucky, very, very good team. Again, they beat Duke, but very different style to where you bring up a great point to where they're not going to be able to do that the same way Duke can, but you still wonder with all that off ball movement with how much guys just gonna be running, pure running. Can Louisville hold up for a full 40 minutes in a very different Kentucky's almost more like the Chip Kelly Oregon Ducks to where they can where they're moving fast and they're running that spread offense, all the option plays, all that stuff, to where it's going to be a very still a challenge, but a very different challenge than what Duke had.
Right. And if I'm in that Louisville uh meeting room and talking to the team and as far as the coaches go, you're almost like, well, this is stuff we guard every day. We guard all the movement, we guard all the cutting. This is kind of plays into our hands. We're kind of prepared. You kind of brainwash those guys to understand as good as Kentucky is at that stuff. This is not a situation where Duke, where okay, they're just going to throw 5 star after 5 star after 5 star at you, and they're just coming downhill. And foot speed is kind of that kind of gets neutralized, and now all of a sudden we can't individually contain guys because they're just so athletic. Where Kentucky is more rhythmic and methodical with that, but that's what they practice against. And now uh, you don't have a case of Pryor, you don't have Traore, but you have guys that collectively can be connected. And this is where a guy like Chucky can be a little more active, can dig, can be off the ball, and the switching and the things that Louisville might want to do is a little. I'm not saying easier, but the foundation is okay. We can contain guys. We just got to make sure that we're not that all 5 guys are connected. Because all it takes is one guy to just be out of position to break down.
I would say two things that when Kentucky has the ball that I think Louisville two things to be mindful of really is one, we've seen Louisville struggle to turn teams over when they take really good care of the ball. We saw that both with Duke and Ole Miss in the past week and a half or so. Kentucky's top five in the country in offensive turnover percentage, turning the ball over less than 13% of their possessions. And obviously they shoot the three ball really well. Well, so can Louisville create some turnovers, get some easy buckets will be a big key. And the other thing both when Kentucky's been at their best and when Louisville's been at their worst, obviously the three-point shooting takes so many headlines with Kentucky. They're, a top 10 team or whatever, three-point shooting wise in the country. But when Kentucky made their big runs against Duke and against Gonzaga to get wins, it wasn't that they were shooting and making a bunch of threes. It was they were getting into the lane and really pounding the paint, which is not something that people talk a lot about with Kentucky, but is something that I think when they're at their most effective, it's not when they're going to shoot a lot of threes, obviously, but not when they settle for jump shots. It's when they attack. And Louisville, when they've struggled, whether it be against Ole Miss or even in the Duke game, Tennessee, obviously, way back in November, they've struggled at times keeping teams out of the paint. Can Louisville be able to take that away enough from Kentucky while also not overcommitting and leaving a bunch of shooters wide open? That's the struggle when you're trying to defend this Kentucky team. To be completely honest, you can't take everything away.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna hire you as my scouting director because in the future for all the games because you were absolutely you took exactly what I was going to say. You got to make them a jump shooting team. You've got to make them. You got to make sure that the slips and all those type of things are not going to be a factor. You're going to live with that. Contest those jump shots and gang rebound and so on, but make Kentucky a jump shooting team because yeah, like you mentioned, I think it's going to be Williams and Carr trying to play inside out. And if it's whether it's firing down and living it, you can't live in your fears. So you're going to take something away, whether it's doubling the post, which they've done before. And I don't have any inside information on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying to take the ball out of Carr Williams and make those guys because you're not going to have a lot of guys that are just going to be able to blast and straight line drive you. And even sometimes short closing and contesting those jump shots, I think that's the key for this game. I think make them a jump shooting team, make them shoot the three and just not let them play inside out. And I think that's the way Louisville defends this Kentucky team and has a good chance to win.
I think Louisville. I mean, it's not crazy to say Louisville wins this game. I think I don't think a lot of people are going to be picking them. I don't know if I would pick them to win the game, but you see a path to where if Louisville, as you said, can turn Kentucky into a jump shooting team, if Louisville can play through Edwards, I think a lot on the offensive end and try to exploit the mismatch on the
You
other end.
absolutely will see that. There's no question you'll see
Yeah.
that. Continue, Jack.
And I think if Chucky Hepburn's the best player on the floor, which I think he can be, I think in a lot of games this year for Louisville, he has been. Even in the Duke game where he didn't shoot the ball well, I would argue for the first 25, 30 minutes of the game, he was the most impactful guy on either team in
Hmm.
that. I honestly think right now, I don't know if you can name 4 or 5 guards that have been better this year than Chucky Hepburn. I think he's played like an All-American this year. He really
No
has
doubt.
been.
No
And
doubt.
and I look at it and I say Kentucky, I think, has the overall better collection of talent, especially when you consider the injuries and all that stuff. But if Chucky Hepburn's able to win the individual matchup with Lamont Butler, if he's able to be a pest and get deflections and steals and disrupt Kentucky's offense and is able to break down the defense a little bit offensively, which is a big ask coming against Lamont Butler for sure, but maybe not to score for himself, but to set other guys up and just get the offense moving, get the ball moving. That could be a big key for Louisville. It's him, and again, it's Edwards. Can Edwards and Hadley exploit the mismatch of having Andrew Garr or Brandon Garrison or some of these taller, less athletic dudes guarding them? I mean, we
Hmm.
saw Duke really attack that, and Andrew Garr, to his credit, had a couple of really nice one-on-one moments on both ends of the floor against Cooper Flag, but can he do that consistently for a full 40 minutes? I'm not sure. You think about the biggest play of the game, it was Otega Owe coming in and getting the steal, helping Carr out a little bit.
Right.
If Louisville's spacing is good, if they're able to knock down some shots, get some of the positive regression from hitting threes, can Andrew Carr on an island one on one? We've talked about so much on the other end of the floor, Carr attacking Louisville, but can Carr hold up defensively against Edwards and Hadley and Louisville's smaller guys trying to attack him with quickness?
Yeah, you're spot on as far as what they need to do on the offensive end. And look, when you talk about Kentucky, how they came back against Duke was again just Duke was you have young players, and again uh you don't have a great sample size in the scout of Kentucky. So those guys were staying attached to their guys and letting Carr and Williams just go one on one in the post. Where I just think in this game you kind of take the ball out of their hands, make them passers instead of scorers. And on the offensive end, yeah, you get that movement and Terrence Edwards and Hadley and all those guys with their athleticism. Look, and then you have it when bodies come off bodies because those guys are so good. The body comes off bodies. A James Scott now can get to the offensive boards, and all those things are factors when you run great offense. So when you have that situation, Jack, I think that's a huge key. And then you're going to say, look, Edwards is now the confidence and feeling good about what he's doing is a huge part of that. Hadley has been effective. I think that's going to be a big part of what they do on the offensive end. And then just defensively, I just think a big key is making it a jump shooting team. And I think that gives you an opportunity. As you said, I don't know if there's an early line on this game, but I think Louisville's going to compete in battle for sure.
I would
And,
say I
and
don't.
you look at it from this standpoint, Jack, and it's almost like it's almost a good thing because these guys they don't feel as much pressure. You look when I was at when I was coaching here, the pressure that everybody felt having been in the program for a year or 2 years, 3 years, it was paramount. Just like it's overwhelming. Now you have guys who don't listen. They played in rivalry games before, but they don't know the magnitude really. They get it, but it doesn't. It's not going to be so much of a factor where they feel overwhelmed playing at Rupp or so on. It's not going to be, oh my gosh, Louisville versus Kentucky. These guys have played in other big games, and it's just really another big game for them. But they're not going to feel the magnitude that fans feel of Louisville, Kentucky.
Do you think you guys back in the day were too tight and wound up with all that
One
in
thousand
those
percent.
games?
1,000%. We over practice, we over watch film and that kind of stuff. But that's look, you have that much time, and so if you're going to take it, if you want to spin it, where all right, where you only have a day, a couple days to prep. I know the UTEP game, and I understand that, but rather than have a whole week, and for us, we played that game New Year's, and then you don't have classes, so you can go for as long as you want in practices. And Coach Pitino enjoyed that, but didn't enjoy that week of prep for Kentucky. And I know the players didn't because, yeah, it was a lot. Now you have a situation where I don't think from a staff standpoint, Jack, that you're going to just put so much emphasis on just you're not going to look. They know it's not another game, but I think because you have a brand new team that hasn't lived through this, and they're only getting a couple days through that. That's a great way to take that approach as a staff and say, hey, yeah, we're going after this is another game for us, but this is huge for everybody involved. But look, it's not so they have to dwell on it, or these guys have heard about it for 2 years about losing to Kentucky and so on. It doesn't matter to those guys as much. So going in, I think it's a different type of mindset that you have with this approach to the game, which I think is healthy.
I would say it's also maybe gone a little under the radar in terms of there's been so much talk of, well, trying to bring Louisville basketball back, reviving it, and all that stuff, to where the big picture aspect of making Louisville a relevant program again has kind of overshadowed the usual, go beat Kentucky every day that I'm sure a lot of players have heard in the past throughout the course of the year as well. That could be a little interesting tidbit as well. How much of this game simply comes down to of whether Louisville can compete or not will be, can Louisville hit 3 pointers?
I mean, look, I love listening to Bill Self when they ever asked him, like, what do you guys do in offense? If you ever hear him in an interview at halftime or after the game, like, well, we made shots, and he keeps it as simplistic as possible. The but I go back to what I talked about earlier because I've seen that in the last 3 games. How hard I saw that in the Bahamas too, and the sensitivity is they're cutting so hard, they're scoring cuts, they're screening better. I mean, that was a thing of beauty that they had with the action of just slip by Rain Smith and the back screen, and then you got an option to go zoom on the opposite side, and you just saw that constantly against Duke. They're just cutting hard. They're getting to spots. They're trusting each other. And when you take guys out of the lineup, and you take Coleman, you take Pryor out, you take Traore out, and now all of a sudden they've adjusted to that. They practice. They understand. Okay, those guys aren't walking through the door, so this is how we're gonna play. I think that's a huge part. But I think they're gonna shoot it. I think they're going to get some good looks, and I think Kentucky understands that as well. I think that you're going to see some slip opportunities for Louisville, but man, just come out and sometimes that's just something that's not a controllable. But I really hope they come out and they shoot the ball well on Saturday.
Yeah, I think they're going to need to because, Kentucky is a team that's you look at the Gonzaga game. I don't expect Mark Pope to come out in a 1-3-1 zone like he did out of halftime in Seattle unless something has gone incredibly
Right.
well for Louisville early in the game, which you never know. But I think the one thing we've seen from Pope that I think has been the most impressive to me is that in the Duke and the Gonzaga games, the 2 games that Kentucky has their big wins, the biggest reasons they won the game, in my argument, would be making adjustments on the defensive end, whether it be how they defended ball screens against Duke to where they started mixing up coverages and trying to confuse the younger, more talented but younger Duke team, which really worked and took them out of their rhythm, or against Gonzaga, throwing in that 1-3-1 zone, going in and out of it, mixing and matching defenses to really slow the tempo of the game down and turn Gonzaga quite literally into a jump shooting team and to where they weren't playing to their strengths anymore, got them out of that high ball screen action. If Louisville's able to do something early, Pat Kelsey and his staff have to be ready for Pope to adjust and have a good counterpunch ready for whatever that adjustment may be.
And you've already, as a staff and as a scout, you've already gone through, like, John Calipari, when I was at Louisville, would always play a 2-3 zone for about 10 minutes.
The Tony Barbee 2-3 zone.
There you go. And we'd play that, would never play it, but we would have to practice against it. So you understand, and Coach Kelsey does such a good job on the offensive end and defensive end, but they're prepared for anything that they've shown this year. And even if it's a junk defense out of a timeout or something like that, Louisville's going to be prepped and prepared for those type of things. And so, when you show that, you're prepped for it, guys are prepared. And you're talking about veterans. You just mentioned about Duke not understand. Hey, the young guys who haven't seen that, the veterans that Louisville has, these guys have seen every defense that you could throw at them. So it's nothing that's going to surprise them. They're handling that. They understand that, and they can talk about that as a staff going into this game. So it's a little different when you have younger players who, not understanding that kind of stuff, even against Gonzaga, when you have that rhythm and saying, okay, well, we're disrupting that. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of changing of defenses against Louisville. I just think they're going to just really focus on sort of taking some things away. Rain Smith is going to have to understand there's going to be a player attached to him at all times. They're not going to be helping off of him. So what can he do? He can set hammers. He can cut. He can get different actions to create leads. He can backstream, which he does a very good job of. And that's going to open up other guys. And then that opens up Terrence Edwards coming off a back screen in that short post, an area where he can score and there's not going to be help. So I think Louisville's going to look to do things where they're going to just overload size where Rain Smith, maybe a guy can't help, and now a Terrence Edwards, a Hadley, even Scott can get the ball into actions, whether it's rolling in place, whether it's a dribble handoffs, where Kentucky's going to be consumed. And that's a way to attack them where you're taking, okay, we use Rain not as a decoy, but understanding that we can run actions that Kentucky can't help off of and on that side.
One quick question on Rain Smith before we get out of here. By the way, also both Ken Pom and Torvik have Kentucky by 11
I was going
in
to
their
say 12.
projections.
So
Yeah.
I was going to say, all right, so it's right there.
Yeah, so that's about where I would expect that to be.
Mm-hmm.
Me, I think that's a fair line for this one. But one question on Rain Smith. Obviously, with the injuries, he's going to play a lot of minutes, and he's been Louisville's best outside shooter throughout the year. And as you just mentioned, how he can be a threat in so many different ways on the offensive end. We've seen, though, especially in that UTEP game on Wednesday night and in Duke and other points throughout the year, I think you're seeing teams really attack him
Mm-hmm.
defensively a lot one-on-one, and he struggled at times being able to stay in front of players. I'm sure that's something Mark Pope's seeing and saying, okay, Jackson Robinson, if because Lamont Butler's going to be playing now, that's probably going to be more of your matchup, or whoever ends up guarding UK has so many guys that can score and get to the bucket. How does Louisville try to mask that without compromising, either straight line drives or giving up wide open threes?
Yeah, we talked even about Tennessee. They put Rain Smith in about 5 floppy actions, and he got screened. You had Corin Johnson over helping on that one play where Ziegler hits the three, and so on. Because look, they understand that he's a tough kid. He competes, but the physical attributes he's going to have to understand positioning and so on. So look, we talked about collective unit. You watch Louisville; they're connected defensively, and I think that's a situation where it's a little different than a Duke or an Ole Miss or a Tennessee, where, all right, you know what? You can't overhelp on this situation. You make sure that he's not getting beat on drives and force them to kick it back out for shots. And then we're going to close out and do our jobs and not, you don't have to get the rebound, but your man can't. So I think it's a situation going into this game where they understand that. I think they're going to give him help on situations and just take that stuff away where you game plan it. Look, Kentucky's going to have to make jump shots if they're going to beat us.
Yeah, and I would say
And just try and protect him.
a key thing you just said there was, the floppy action against Tennessee. I think that type of stuff is going to be even more important than just straight line drives in this Kentucky game because of Kentucky's off ball player and ball movement is really going to be how they get a lot of their offense. So Rain's going to have, and everyone on that side of things, if Louisville's going to have a chance to compete and defend and make things tough for Kentucky at that offensive end, they're going to have to defend a lot of those type of actions really well.
No question. No question. And look, with Rain, I love his competitiveness and he understands it. He's going to get better at those things, dodging, defeating screens, understanding angles, playing at this level, through practices and now through the games. I think he's going to continue to get better and understand, hey, it's arm's distance. It's not crowding guys, not letting guys get to my hip, understanding angles, patching moves, being bouncy with and understanding that and expecting to be screened or cut on every play. I think he's going to continue to get better as the level goes up. I think he's adjusting to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Going to be an absolute blast on Saturday. Battle of the Bluegrass, Louisville, looking to win in Rupp Arena for the first time since 2008, which is or 2007, 2008, which is kind of crazy to think about. I was in fourth grade at the time, so tall task for the Cards. But
so was I, Jack. I was in fourth grade as well. So.
But if they're able to pull that one off on Saturday, that would be a massive, massive win. No one has to say that. Everyone knows what that would mean if Louisville could pull that off. But we'll be back to break that one down. Coach, always, always, always appreciate it. For Coach Lieberman, I'm Jack Grossman. This has been Floyd Treat's Finest, and we'll catch